More pugs. So, I had a couple people, taking a look at things, and, they were just puttering around, and all of a sudden, one of them asked a very important question. Where is the Russian Navy Sucks Part 6? I missed it. Well, we're gonna fix that today. The Russian Navy Sucks Part 6, the real hunt for Red October. Now, guys, let's just sit back and relax and learn about a time before time. In the long, long ago, when people realized that you really don't want to be with the people that you don't have a problem just doing kind of a lot of the things that the Russians were doing at the time. You don't want to be with the Russians now. It's just a general statement of preference. Guys, what do I know about this one? Now, I typically do know some things about things that history has been talking about the past couple of weeks. In fact, I have a fair understanding of it. But this one? No, I don't know anything. I have no idea. I know about the movie Red October, but I don't know anything about this. Am I stupid? Probably, but we'll find out. Warpugs, all the links are going to be in the description down below. Hit the like and subscribe button. Let's get right into this.
Valery Sablin.
You serious?
Alright, I got it. He's in that Hoi 4 mod with a terrible UI. In 1975, the Soviet Union was in a bit of a state. Most of the annual budget, after all, had been going into the maintenance of Brezhnev's eyebrows and funneling weapons into whatever country's opposition the CIA was funneling weapons to. But during this magical time of kleptocratic insanity and bodging of new nuclear power plants, which totally won't come back to haunt them in 11 years, the average person in the Soviet Union kind of noticed things were getting a bit crap. As in really crap.
Yeah?
As in, oh god, the economy is dying crap, but hey, never mind, let's laugh at the silly Americans for the fall of Saigon on the 30th of April. Imagine that. Intervening in a war, only having to withdraw. Wouldn't be us. Anyway.
Yep. What?
On a more serious note, by 1975 things were not going well in the Soviet Union economically, as
True.
the country entered what we now call the era of Great Stagnation. Following the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953, and with the collective sigh of relief that quite literally everyone except for the politicians felt, the Soviet Union went through a period known collectively what we call in the West as the Khrushchev Thaw. This period saw an end to the extremely repressive policies of the Stalinist era, as Steve Buscemi liberated the entire nation by taking the drastic step of not shooting everybody who sneezes in the slightly wrong communist way.
But you have to do that because you have to support the revolution, You have to support the revolution, and if you sneeze to the left and to the left, you're good. If you sneeze to the right, you gotta go to the gulag. That's just the way of things. I don't understand why people have a problem with this.
The thaw also included fiscal reforms that would actually benefit the Soviet economy quite a bit.
Now you see, that's him just becoming a capitalist pig, okay? I'm just saying. Everybody knows it.
Such as the introduction of a minimum wage, and the expansion of media and arts and, cultural things, nice things.
Oh wow, what happened? Oh god. Letting it go.
Khrushchev, though, went a bit too hard, too fast, due to what can be described as his personal vendetta against Stalin. And in this, he alienated many of the supporters who still held Stalin in high regard, possibly suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. One of such people was Leonid Eyebrow Brezhnev, who ousted Khrushchev as leader in 1964. And although initially the Soviet economy would prosper, because Khrushchev had done all the nice things, and Brezhnev wasn't the worst initially, Brezhnev's reintroduction of Stalinist policies would signal the end of that thaw, and it began to inhibit economic growth. To put it plainly, the Soviets decided to spend more and more money on their military and not other silly things like, the proletariat. Guess what? You can't eat a T-Series tank.
Yes, you can if it's built in the right factory.
Right into space, though. The slowing of the Soviet economy matched up perfectly with the beginning of a gerontocracy within the Soviet Union. That's when you have really old people in government who, should have retired anyway. Congress. Anyway, this furthered the lag being experienced by the USSR against its Western adversaries. Brezhnev's much more violent reaction to anti-communist uprisings, such as the Prague Spring in 1968, where we get the term tanky from, furthered the USSR's return to a more repressive state, with a leader doing his best to role-play Stalin. Brezhnev was particularly angsty when it came to ensuring that communism remained in place in the Soviet satellites. Generally speaking, in an attempt to overcome the economic depression, the Soviet Union attempted large infrastructure projects, in particular in the field of atomic energy, to provide cheaper alternatives to power the state. The lack of resources caused by the economic situation led to unsafe practices, and the bureaucrats, each attempting to fulfill orders given from the level above them and trying to one-up each other to steal each other's jobs and, communist Soviet things. Meanwhile, in the background, the Soviets weren't entirely blind to just how shitty things were getting under their dear leader. Some of these people even had guns. And on the 8th of November, one of them, having a sudden rush of shit to the brain and thinking this would end in any other way than a loud bang and a hole in his head, decided to channel the voodoo of Lenin and bring sexy back to the Soviet Union by using the ship he was on to imitate the famous Aurora. Valery Sablin, by all accounts a very highly competent naval officer who had quite a brain and was quite a good graduate, was going to stoke the fires of revolution and bring communism back like it was 1917 all over again.
But you see, you're not the right kind of communist anymore, which I never really understood that there was I never really have understood what they mean by right kind of communist. I don't understand that at all. I don't want to understand that, because that would mean I'd have to be brain damaged to believe this crap.
On the 9th of November 1975, captain of the 3rd rank, Soviet ranking is weird, don't worry about it, he's an officer and the ship's political commissar, Valery Sablin, aboard the frigate Storozhevoy, went to his captain to report there were some sailors below deck completely off their face drunk. The captain, being a captain in the Soviet Navy in the 70s and understanding drunkenness was just Tuesday on a slow week, followed the officer below deck to discipline the men likely probably going to beat them. Because it's the Soviet Navy during the 70s. Upon reaching the lower decks and noticing that it was in fact empty, about a fisticuffs ensued, and the two men fought each other, with Sablin detaining the captain and other officers in the forward sonar compartment. Sablin then called a meeting of the remaining senior sailors and loyal officers aboard, and he allowed them to vote as to whether they stayed aboard or not. He laid out that the Soviet leaders were all corrupt. Yes! And that they betrayed the revolution and had abandoned Marxist-Leninism.
Of course.
Yes! And that his plan was to steam to Leningrad, the home of the revolution, and broadcast a message which would be revolutionary, and he would do this by parking his revolutionary ship next to another revolutionary ship, the Aurora, to restart the revolution. Can you tell that he was a die-hard communist yet? Of the 15 officers Sablin assembled, 8 of them said, sure, yeah, why not, let's do this.
It's always not real communism, isn't it? It's always not real communism.
Thinking it was a great idea, and the rest were brutally beaten and thrown below. Because it was the Soviet Navy in the 70s. With the officers on side, or beaten to a pulp 50-50, our intrepid adventurer with his comrades turned his attention to the crew of 150 men. Sablin was pretty popular though, and he gave a revolutionary speech promising a big revolution, a huge revolution, the greatest revolution you can imagine. Like it was going to be such a revolution that people would be tired of revolutions. And the whole crew basically enthusiastically agreed, or according to some sources after persuasion, enthusiastically agreed. One of the officers, seeing that saying no meant getting a beating, agreed to the mutiny, and at the first chance he could snuck off to warn the guards that there was in fact a mutiny occurring. The guard didn't believe him because such things don't happen in the Soviet Navy and such initiative was not welcome in Comrade Eyebrow's Soviet Union. So naturally both the guard and the officer would wind up being tortured, starved and beaten by the KGB after first being accused of being drunk.
Yeah, this is Russia.
Realizing that they may now be detected, a Krivat-class frigate not at all being the stealthiest, Sablin decided to set sail straight away. His original plan was to undertake the mutiny at sea, once the fleet had sailed on an exercise, allegedly. But given the circumstances, he thought leaving straight away would give him the best chance at victory. And so the Storozhevoy set sail, her radars turned off to avoid detection, to start a revolution in a communist country. This may be a good time to pause to explain what exactly the Storozhevoy was. Storage meaning guardian or sanctuary in Russian, was a that's a word, Berezvetnik class anti-submarine frigate. In NATO language, it's a Krivak 1, which is the term I'm going to be using because I'm not saying Berezvetnik about 30 times in a 20 or so minute video.
I understand.
The Krivaks were another one of those jack-of-all trades, master of none hull things that look really imposing and are somewhat decent, but are generally speaking just kind of mid. It's a frigate, okay? It isn't some kind of Wunderwaffe. It'll escort things well, it'll kill submarines, but like the Nox, it has limitations.
Right.
It's not an Oliver Hazard Perry, which has some kind of weird Rasputin level stay aliveness that no one really understands no matter what it gets hit by. The Storozheboy, one of 21 Krivak 1s, was of the frigate variety, designed mostly to hunt NATO submarines and shoot aircraft down. A regular run-of-the-mill kind of frigate. I think they look kind of cool, personally. But the Krivaks could kind of do everything depending on what they were outfitted for. To an extent. The KGB Coast Guard and now the FSB Coast Guard even use them. Yeah, that's right, the State Security Service has frigates, don't worry about it, it's Russia. Speaking of CIA frigates, when?
Love it.
Back to the mutiny. Probably because Sablin was too busy hugging a life-size body pillow of Lenin or something. A junior officer escaped his confinement below decks and found his way to a radio. It appears that this could have been a short-ranged radio somewhere else on board, but it's kind of speculatory. All we know is he made his way to a radio. But he was able to alert the authorities to the fact that something was, in fact, happening.
Oh!
This time, they actually listened. And fearful of a repeat of the defection of Jonas Plesky's to Sweden, the Soviet commanders gave the order that the ship, under all circumstances, must be stopped. According to some reports, as soon as the ship cleared the mouth of the Gulf of Riga, 13 ships of the Baltic Fleet, in their ports and at sea already, sortied, along with 13 warplanes, amongst them Yak-28 bombers, who incidentally this would be the one and only time they would actually get to fire in anger during a ship. The Soviets were in a bit of a tricky situation here, as they wanted to recover the ship, but not to destroy it if they could avoid it, because, it's kind of hard to explain why you bombed your own frigate to the Swedish and NATO, who would, sort of notice this thing.
Just deny. That's the only thing that you have to do. I'm not sure why we have such a problem doing this.
Also, there's 150 crew aboard, and try explaining that to the bomber pilots that you have to kill 150 of your own comrades. But anyway, now the official story is that they knew what was going on the whole time and that they never lost the ship. The reality was that the only ships close enough to stop the ship in those first few hours were outgunned by the frigate, and they didn't particularly fancy getting smacked around, although it is arguable whether or not Sablin would have fought the ship against his erstwhile comrades, if it came to push to shove. The Soviet command realised the closer ship's shortcomings, and decided that they would set the bombers onto the Storozheboy, but they weren't exactly sure where it was, and it kind of looked like a lot of other Soviet frigates out on the water, which is a slight issue. Now that the situation was getting a bit out of hand, aka the government ministers were shitting them bricks that the ship would defect to Sweden, the order to sink the ship was getting more and more frantic. Don't worry about the fact there's 150 crew aboard and they might be innocent.
Right.
The poor conditions limited the bombers' visibility, and they struggled to find it. Probably didn't help that they weren't exactly trained to bomb ships in the first place, but don't worry about it. And a second squad...
It's amazing that they sat there and they were like, oh crap, there's a ship defecting, let's sink the whole damn thing. Because the sheer fact of the matter is, we wouldn't want anybody to leave the glorious communist state, now would we?
Squad of Yaks found a large ship and began bombing it. But it was a cargo ship. Shooting the wrong target. Again, old habits die hard, huh?
Yeah.
And so, another squad of Yaks went up, and somehow somebody had a brainwave that the ship might be close to Soviet waters. Remember how I said, though, that the Soviet Navy had been shadowing the ship? Well, they hadn't actually reported to the Air Force because reasons.
Right.
So the Soviet Navy never actually lost the ship, they just didn't tell anyone where they knew it was. The most accepted reason being that they didn't think the Air Force squadron of Yaks would be tasked to stop it. There was still one Yak from the 2nd Bomber Squadron in the air though, and it was over near Gotland, and it found 2 large frigates in the water. One of them was the flagship of the Pursuit Squadron, and after getting really low and disobeying orders, the other was the Storozheboy. The bomber proceeded to drop multiple payloads both in front of and behind the ship in an attempt to disable her, as well as firing their cannons into the sea. Eventually this was quite effective, and it appears that the steering gear aboard the Storozheboy was disabled. Right on cue though, more Soviet bombers arrived and started bombing the wrong frigate. Namely, they were bombing the ship chasing.
God, you gotta love it. This is the Somebody give me a bottle of vodka and a tracksuit, please.
The storage buoy, and the patrol boats began to fire to drive off the friendly planes. It's honestly a miracle that the old frigate wasn't destroyed at this point, and both the ships and pilots blamed each other for not designating the correct target. Likely realizing their goose was cooked, the storage void came to a stop, and Soviet Marine commandos boarded, only to find Sablin aboard his ship with a hole in his knee and detained by his own crew, who had freed their captain. What is likely is that when the crew realized that they were in fact going to die if they kept following him, they had enough. The storage void gingerly made its way back to port, and on arrival, Sablin was brutally beaten and then arrested by the KGB.
Of course.
Who would starve him and torture him during the interrogation.
Of
because
course.
Soviet Union in the 70s.
Yes.
Sablin was charged with high treason and court-martialed, and 1 year later, although his crime generally only carried a 15-year prison sentence, he was executed.
Imagine my shock. Imagine my shock. A communist who doesn't think you're good enough communist gets executed because he's an enemy of the revolution. Can anybody please, for the love of God, find me a scorecard for the mental gymnastics that are required here?
His second in command, Alexander Sheen, received an 8-year prison sentence, and the other would-be mutineers were allegedly let go completely scot-free. Allegedly, and according to some sources, the KGB, feeling like they hadn't rammed the message home hard enough, beat the ever-loving crap out of significant portions of the storage boat's crew, including the captain, who was locked below. This is just allegedly. I'm not entirely sure.
I'm pretty sure it's
they were
true.
just sent off and told to bugger off, which we all try.
Look, see, okay, look. The thing is, when you have to look at Russia, realize it's not important that you get the message right. It's just that the message is sent. Look at every single major Russian stupidity just masterclass and realize they were trying to send a message. It just didn't matter who the message was on. And it didn't matter what the message actually was. They were just going to be excessively violent for no stupid reason.
Trying to think happened anyway. When we know it happened anyway to an extent because the ship was completely given a new crew, not even 6 months after the incident. The Soviets were genuinely quite embarrassed by the whole fiasco, and they quickly ordered the storage void with that brand new crew to be redeployed to the Far East, and she departed in early 1976 for Petropavlovsk. The rest of her career being relatively quiet, the only notable thing being that she made a port call to the then Ethiopian port of Massawa, modern-day Eritrea, in 1980. And in June 2002, she was sold to an Indian breaker for scrapping. As for Sablin, the Soviets spun a yarn that Sablin's intention was to defect to the United States.
Of course.
Which, if you understand the geography of Riga and the Baltic Sea, kinda checks out, but not really. Sablin originally had to sail west to get out of the Gulf of Riga, which makes him have to go towards Gotland and Sweden, which makes the story believable. Reality was that Sablin was going north to Leningrad. The Soviet lie was generally, though, quite believable, and it would actually take until the end of the Cold War for the rest of the West to find out that Sablin never actually intended to defect. He was a Soviet through and through. Sablin remained a dedicated communist until his death, his last letter to his son reading, "Trust the fact that history will judge events honestly, and that you will never have to be embarrassed for what your father did. On no account ever be one of those people who criticize but do not follow through their actions. Such people are hypocrites, weak, worthless people who do not have the power to reconcile their beliefs with their actions. I wish you courage, my dear. Be strong in your belief that life is wonderful. Be positive and believe that the revolution will always win." He followed this up by stating in his farewell letter to his parents that, "I am convinced that a revolutionary consciousness will catch fire amongst our people."
Okay.
Now that technically happened.
Yeah, it did.
Just not in the way you think.
Exactly.
20 years later, though, the Soviet Union was gone. And ultimately, what Sablin did, in many ways, can be seen as being done for no reason at all. As an interesting anecdote, the American researcher Gregory D. Young wrote his 1982 master's thesis, Mutiny on the Storage Void, a case study of dissent in the Soviet Navy, on this very topic. It is a fascinating read, and I encourage you to check it out. This thesis was stored in the United States Naval Academy, and one day an unknown insurance salesman by the name of Tom Clancy found it, and he loved it. He would adapt it into a book, which would then later become a movie, with the worst sounding Russian accents I've ever heard in human history.
Yes.
The Hunt for Red October. So I expect in about 30 years some random salesman to read my eventually to be published research thesis on the evolution of the Royal Navy from pirates to professionals 1500 to 1750, and I expect a movie with absolutely horrific accents to be published with my name in the accreditations.
You must do this. The sheer fact of the matter is, we do not have a British warship being piloted by Bostonians. And I think that that is a needed thing in this day and age. I think that we must have this, especially if the person who is supposed to be the Scottish midshipman just somehow winds up being from the Lower East Side of like Manhattan. I'm just putting it out there, and let's get the lead bosun. Let's get him from Louisiana. That would be preferable. And then on top of it all, let's have him fight the French, and the French is actually from Oregon.
Objecting. That'll bore you to death. I wouldn't.
Why
actually
not?
Put you through it.
Come on!
Like, comment, subscribe, Patreon link in description, join Discord, all the normal things. Thank you all to the patrons, and I will catch you next time.
Warpugs. Every single time I see one of these, my brain starts to collapse a little bit. This is the first time I think I realized that, yeah, we have a story that doesn't involve trash training and terrible maintenance turning into a near international incident, or a combination of blatant stupidity plus the aforementioned trash training and terrible maintenance strategy causing just an outright embarrassing defeat. This is the first time it's only been communism working as intended. Warpugs, why are people stupid? These are questions I need the answers to at some point, but I'll never get them. I'm gonna head out from here. The sheer fact of the matter is, Warpugs, I don't understand. Like, when Stalinism stopped, you would have thought that the people at that point would have turned around and been like, no more of this shit. No more of it. Leave it be. We're stepping away. But they immediately re-embraced it. And that is because people trust, like, I just remember when I was a kid, in the 90s, you were told, like, counterculture was distrust authority, 100%. It was a thing. You know, Rage Against the Machine, everything else. Now people are wearing hats that say obey. I don't understand. I never will. Warpugs, if you want early access, join as a channel member or Patreon and check the merch store. I'm leaving. My brain hurts because I just watched another thing about Russia. And watching things about Russia hurts my feelings. I'll catch you guys next time. My God, what is wrong with people?